What if reality was just a fragile illusion stitched together by paranoia dreams and cosmic deceit? The 1970s dared to ask that question and film it. This was the decade when science fiction stopped being about rockets and started being about the mind itself. From identity breakdowns to time loops, these films burned logic alive. Get ready for 12 mind-bender sci-fi movies that melt your brain. Number 12. Zardoz, 1974. At first glance, Zardoz looks like madness on film. Sean Connery dressed in a red loincloth, giant stone heads vomiting guns, a world where immortality has become a curse. Critics called it pretentious and absurd, yet time has proven it prophetic. John Boorman's vision of a divided future mirrored the collapse of faith in both science and humanity. In this surreal dystopia, a brutal enforcer named Zed discovers that his god, the stonehead Zardoz, is a lie. The immortal elite have trapped themselves in a sterile paradise, cut off from pain, death, and meaning. The film unravels like a nightmare that refuses to end. Each frame feels hallucinatory, a fever dream painted in sunlight and madness. During production, Connery had just left his Bond legacy and risked everything to reinvent himself. The Irish sets were freezing. The budget vanished mid-shoot. Boorman financed parts of it from his own pocket. When it premiered, audiences were stunned. Some walked out, others called it a masterpiece. For years it was mocked, yet its ideas about entropy, artificial immortality, and societal decay now feel disturbingly real. Today, Zardoz is seen as one of the boldest acts of cinematic rebellion, a movie that dared to mock God itself and expose the emptiness of eternity. It whispers that even paradise can rot from within. Number 11. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Few sci-fi films feel this lonely, this drenched in alien melancholy. Nicholas Roeg turned David Bowie into a mirror for human despair. When it released, critics were divided, unsure whether it was genius or chaos. Yet behind its surreal imagery lies one of the most tragic commentaries on greed and isolation ever filmed. Bowie plays an alien who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet. Instead, he is corrupted by television, money, and desire. His mission collapses into obsession and madness as Earth devours his innocence. Roeg's fragmented editing turns time into a maze, each scene slipping away before it can make sense. It feels less like a movie and more like falling through a dream you cannot escape. Behind the scenes, Bowie was living through exhaustion and addiction, yet his disorientation gave the role its haunting realism. Crew members said he barely seemed human on set, often staring past people as if seeing another dimension. Censors trimmed scenes, and distributors buried it, fearing controversy. But over the decades it rose from obscurity into legend, inspiring generations of filmmakers, from Alex Garland to Denis Villeneuve. It predicted our worship of screens and the loneliness beneath endless progress. The Man Who Fell to Earth remains a warning that when we bring our corruption to the stars stop shining back. Number 10. Phase 4, 1974. Saul Bass was known as a master of title design, not direction. So when he made his only feature film, audiences expected style, not substance. Instead, they got a hypnotic nightmare about intelligence evolution and the collapse of human dominance. The story follows scientists studying ants that have suddenly begun to evolve beyond comprehension. What begins as simple observation becomes a war of minds. The ants communicate, organize, and soon start reshaping the desert itself into a geometric message to humanity. Bass shot the film like a hallucination with microscopic photography that feels alive, terrifyingly intelligent. Paramount executives panicked when they saw the original ending. It was too abstract, too cosmic. They demanded cuts and replaced Bass's finale with a safer one. For decades, his true ending, showing mankind's transformation into a new hybrid species, remained lost. It was rediscovered decades later and screened to stunned audiences who finally saw the full vision. Phase 4 was ignored in its time, but its influence spread quietly. Its insect intelligence and geometric obsession echoed in Annihilation: Arrival and countless nature-based horrors. Bass made a film about evolution itself, watching us with alien eyes. Its message still crawls under your skin. Humanity is no longer at the top of the chain. Number 9. Altered States, 1980. Few films capture the terror of self-discovery like Altered States. Directed by Ken Russell and based on a novel by Paddy Chayefsky, this was no simple trip into science fiction. It was a plunge into the human psyche itself. The story follows Dr. Edward Jessup, a Harvard scientist obsessed with unlocking primordial consciousness through sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic experiments. Russell visualized madness through molten dream sequences where bodies dissolve and identities melt away. William Hurt's performance feels possessed by something ancient as he regresses through evolution itself. Each transformation scene was filmed with physical effects, not computers. Wax molds, latex suits, and chemical reactions created the illusion of a body tearing through time. The production was turbulent. Chayefsky famously clashed with Russell, calling him uncontrollable, and later removed his name from the screenplay. Studio executives feared the film would destroy their reputation, but Russell refused to dilute his vision. When it premiered, audiences were divided between awe and confusion. Some fainted during screenings. Others claimed it opened a door they wished had stayed closed. Decades later, Altered States is recognized as one of the boldest explorations of consciousness in cinema. It asks what happens when we peel back evolution and find nothing human underneath. Its legacy echoes in everything from The Matrix to Annihilation. It is not science fiction, it is spiritual horror disguised as enlightenment. Number 8. Solaris, 1972. Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris was the Soviet response to Kubrick's 2001, but rather than staring outward into the cosmos, Tarkovsky stared inward into guilt, grief, and memory. It was both acclaimed and condemned at home, a film accused of being too emotional for a nation built on logic. Yet its haunting stillness endures as one of the most human works of science fiction ever created. The story follows psychologist Chris Kelvin sent to a space station orbiting the planet Solaris. The planet's ocean reads the human mind and manifests physical recreations of buried memories. Kelvin's dead wife appears before him alive, yet not alive, forcing him to confront what love means when memory itself becomes flesh. Tarkovsky's slow pacing, long takes, and quiet despair turned space travel into confession. The censors fought him relentlessly. They demanded edits to shorten scenes and remove spiritual undertones. Tarkovsky refused. He wanted to make a film about the soul, not technology. The battles drained him, but he prevailed. Solaris won the Grand Prix at Cannes, but Soviet critics dismissed it as decadent Western philosophy. In time, Solaris became revered as the anti-space epic where the greatest alien is human emotion itself. Its atmosphere seeps into later works like Moon and Arrival, whispering that the real frontier is the mind and that memory can be more dangerous than any black hole. Number 7. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. The Andromeda Strain was cold, clinical, and utterly believable. Based on Michael Crichton's novel, it presented a science fiction so grounded it terrified scientists themselves. Directed by Robert Wise, it imagined a deadly microbe from space brought back to Earth by a crashed satellite. What followed was not chaos, but procedure, the horror of rational men watching logic fail. Shot with sterile precision, the film built dread through documentation. Every lab, every panel, every step of protocol is shown in suffocating detail. The computer systems were decades ahead of their time simulated, using real data models that NASA later praised for accuracy. Yet beneath its realism lay existential panic. What if the deadliest weapon is knowledge itself? The production faced its own near disasters. The elaborate sets cost millions and had to be rebuilt after a fire destroyed part of the facility mock-ups. Universal worried the film was too slow for mainstream audiences. Critics were split, some calling it genius, others calling it a glorified manual. But word of mouth grew. Scientists and military strategists screened it for training sessions. The Andromeda strain became a cult monument to pandemic paranoia and control. It predicted the biosecurity fears of the future decades before they arrived. Its final image of a blinking data light still feels like a pulse in the dark, reminding us that nature never sleeps and human arrogance is just another virus waiting to spread. Number 6. THX 1138, 1971. Before Star Wars. George Lucas created a nightmare about control conformity and the death of individuality. THX 1138 was his debut feature and his rebellion against the shiny optimism of science fiction. It flopped on release, but decades later, it stands as one of the most chilling visions of a dehumanized future ever filmed. Set in a sterile underground city, humanity is reduced to numbered citizens, sedated by drugs and monitored by machines. The story follows THX 1138, a factory worker who stops taking his medication and begins to feel something for the first time: fear, love, and rebellion. His awakening turns into a crime against the system. The society around him collapses, not through violence, but through indifference. Lucas filmed the entire movie like a dream, drained of color and sound. The minimalist white sets stretch endlessly, making people look like ghosts trapped in the architecture. Every movement is surveilled, every word recorded. The film's mechanical voice announcements echo like prayers to technology. Behind the scenes, Lucas faced endless studio interference. Warner Brothers executives hated the film and demanded cuts. They could not understand its tone or purpose. Robert Duvall delivered a performance of eerie calm, but the studio refused to promote it, calling it too bleak for audiences. Lucas nearly lost his directing career before it began. Yet time resurrected THX 1138. Modern critics hail it as a visionary masterpiece, predicting digital surveillance and emotional numbness. It inspired countless dystopias from Brazil to The Matrix. Lucas's warning rings truer than ever. A world without pain is also a world without humanity. Number 5. The Omega Man, 1971. Charlton Heston's The Omega Man turned isolation into apocalypse. Based loosely on Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, it imagined a world wiped out by biological war where one man survives alone in Los Angeles. By day, he hunts through empty streets. By night, he barricades himself against the infected remnants of humanity, now twisted into a cult that worships darkness and rejects technology. The film was both action and allegory. Heston's character, Dr. Robert Neville, believes he can restore civilization through science, but as the story unfolds, he becomes a relic himself, a symbol of humanity's arrogance. The mutants see him not as savior, but as the last disease. Director Boris Sagal drenched the film in eerie silence, broken only by Heston's voice, echoing through deserted cities. Behind the camera, the production was haunted by political tension. The studio worried that its commentary on biowarfare and racial violence would anger audiences. Scenes were censored in some regions due to their religious symbolism and violent imagery. Critics dismissed it as pulp, nonsense, but audiences found something deeper. It became a hit on late-night television and inspired future post-apocalyptic visions like 28 Days Later and The Last Man on Earth. Decades later, The Omega Man feels prophetic. It predicted modern fears of pandemics, isolation, and ideological extremism. It whispers that survival without purpose is worse than extinction. And when Heston dies in a pool of his own blood, forming a cross of redemption, the film transforms from pulp to prophecy. Number 4. Fantastic Planet, 1973. René Laloux's Fantastic Planet is what happens when animation dreams in another language. A French-Czech co-production, it presented a world so strange that it defied categories. Part philosophy, part nightmare. It told the story of tiny humans called Oms, enslaved by towering blue aliens known as drags. The film was banned in several countries for its disturbing allegory of oppression. The plot unfolds through surreal visuals that look hand-painted by madness itself. The drags meditate into glowing energy while humans are crushed like insects. Yet within this psychedelic horror lies a message of rebellion. The Oms evolve escape and turn knowledge into survival. During production, Laloux and artist Roland Topor worked in secret from state censors. The Prague Spring had just been crushed, and any film perceived as political could lead to arrest. The crew hid allegories under layers of symbolism. The soundtrack pulsed with hypnotic rhythms that made audiences feel trapped in someone else's dream. When Fantastic Planet premiered at Cannes, it won the jury prize, but governments denounced it. France called it anti-human. The United States labeled it incomprehensible. Yet within the underground counterculture, it became sacred. Students, artists, and dreamers traded bootleg reels, whispering that it was the truest mirror of oppression ever drawn. Its legacy endures in modern sci-fi from Nausicaa to Avatar. It proved that animation could carry existential terror and poetic truth at once. Fantastic Planet reminds us that freedom often begins in the imagination, and that even the smallest beings can rewrite the order of the universe. Number 3. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange may be the most controversial sci-fi of the decade. It was banned, censored, and worshipped all at once. Adapted from Anthony Burgess's novel, it follows Alex DeLarge, a young man addicted to violence and classical music who is subjected to an experimental treatment meant to cure him of his free will. Kubrick's film is brutal yet precise. Every frame glistens with irony. The future is not distant, but disturbingly familiar. Authority becomes as monstrous as the evil it tries to erase. The Ludovico technique scenes, showing forced psychological conditioning, became cultural nightmares burned into film history. The backlash was immediate. Religious leaders denounced it as moral decay. Critics called for censorship. In Britain, copycat crimes led to hysteria, and Kubrick withdrew the film himself from UK distribution for nearly 30 years. Behind the scenes, Malcolm McDowell endured near blindness during filming of the treatment scenes. Kubrick demanded endless takes, pushing his star to the edge of sanity. Despite the chaos, A Clockwork Orange became a landmark of artistic freedom and philosophical terror. It asked whether erasing evil also erases humanity. Its influence stretches from music videos to cyberpunk literature. Kubrick built a world that looked absurd but felt alarmingly true. It tells us that civilization survives, not by control, but by choice, and that when choice dies, humanity dies with it. Number 2. The Parallax View, 1974. The Parallax View hides its science fiction inside paranoia. Directed by Alan J. Pakula, it is part thriller, part psychological experiment. Warren Beatty plays a journalist who uncovers a secret corporation recruiting assassins through psychological conditioning. What begins as political intrigue descends into a surreal dissection of manipulation and mass control. Pakula shot the film in cold light and silence. Every corridor feels infinite. Every face could be lying. The recruitment sequences are among the most disturbing in cinema hypnotic montages designed to erase identity. Critics at the time called it conspiracy fiction, but later generations saw something deeper. It predicted how media could shape perception long before the digital age. Behind the camera, Paramount feared lawsuits. Government agencies monitored its release, believing it reflected real covert operations. Pakula refused to clarify anything. The film's ending, where truth dies in bureaucracy, left audiences stunned. It failed commercially, but critics now call it one of the great American nightmares. The parallax view remains a mind-bender, not because of its technology, but because of its silence. It whispers that control does not need force, only belief. Decades later, its echoes can be heard in modern paranoia films like Enemy and The Game. The parallax view turned journalism into a maze and left viewers wondering who watches the watchers. Number 1. Stalker, 1979. No film better defines the cerebral soul of 70s sci-fi than Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. It was not about aliens or spaceships, but about faith and the fragility of hope. Set in a forbidden wasteland known as the Zone, it follows three men, the writer, the professor, and the stalker, who guides them toward a room that grants one's deepest desire. Tarkovsky shot the film in a decaying industrial landscape of mud rust and silence. Each frame feels sacred. The Zone becomes a living organism responding to human fear. The journey is not physical but spiritual, a meditation on longing guilt and the search for meaning in an empty world. The production was cursed. The original footage was destroyed in a chemical accident, forcing Tarkovsky to reshoot the entire film. Cast and crew were exposed to toxic locations that may have contributed to several later deaths, including Tarkovsky's own. The budget collapsed, the crew mutinied, and yet the director refused compromise. When Stalker premiered, audiences were divided. Some called it incomprehensible, others called it divine. Over time, it became a masterpiece revered by filmmakers and philosophers alike. Its influence flows through Blade Runner 2049 and every modern work that treats science fiction as poetry. Stalker ends not with revelation, but with silence, a whisper that faith is the last form of rebellion left to humanity. It melts the mind, not with spectacle, but with sorrow and awe. The 1970s proved that science fiction was never about the stars, it was about us. Each of these films fractured reality to show the truth hiding beneath it. Which one twisted your mind the most? Tell us in the comments, explore more hidden classics, and remember to like and subscribe for more journeys into cinematic oblivion.